So, say it was the 1890s and you were lucky enough to have one of these, a silver sixpence with a nice head of Queen Victoria on the front. You would be able to buy one of these, the Strand Magazine. So, sixpence, the price, actually denoted by a picture of a sixpence on the top. In today's money, allowing for inflation, that would be about £3.45, which is actually round about what magazines cost at the moment.
Oh, a
bit less, yeah. But in order for the average wage earner to earn one of these babies, if you work it out that way, it'd cost more like £14. So, you know, not the cheapest of magazines, but probably good value with the amount of pages and so on. So the Strand. I love these covers. In fact, I've got a detached cover. So the Strand is a famous street in London, and it connects Trafalgar Square, getting on for going towards Buckingham Palace, with the sort of more raffish world of Fleet Street, the famous sort of street of newspapers and magazines. And it's a great illustration that the cover would always be the same for years and years and years. Very detailed. I love the telegraph wires going across the street, and then they've hung the wording from telegraph wires. There's a sign pointing off to the side street where the Strand's offices were. So yeah, you got that, and you got a whole bunch of adverts as well. So this one has a whopping 30 pages of adverts. Lots of stuff about what you might consume, medicines. This big warning against excessive tea drinking is actually trying to promote cocoa, and yeah, all sorts of products before you get to the contents of the magazine. You want to know why Navy cut tobacco is so called? There's a photograph of a guy winding the tobacco up to make the giant £2 torpedo of tobacco, which sailors would have. Then eventually you got a contents page and a sort of a single-sided print, you know, it's a bit of a pin-up page really, and all sorts of cool stuff. Now this one does not have the Strand Magazine's most famous character in it. Sherlock Holmes appeared, his short stories started appearing in the Strand in 1891, so to look at those we need to go back a bit. Sadly, I don't have that as an individual magazine, but in one of these bound sets, and for obvious reasons a lot of them have survived in this form, that's where we would find, in the July issue, the Sherlock Holmes story. So let's see what the sixpence haver of 1891 might have got. So unsuspectingly, probably. So by this time there'd been 2 Holmes short novels in different magazines. I guess, you know, some people would have known the character, but I think really he comes to life a lot in the short story form. Why looking at Sherlock Holmes now? Well, because it's February, because it's Holmes is where the heart is. Fabulous celebratory event looking at Sherlock Holmes in various ways. We're still in the realms of canon, so not Frank Cannon, another detective, but canonical Sherlock Holmes stories.
Why not Frank Cannon?
Well, why not indeed?
We all love Frank.
Well, when we get into the pastiches, we can have Holmes meets Cannon.
Woohoo!
What am I saying? Yes, Holmes is where the heart is. Event. It's Jim, Mystery and Mayhem. It's Randy Ray, the literate Texan. It's Alan, big hard books and classics. It's Greg, another bibliophile reads. And it's Mark, Book Time with Elvis. Hosts assemble. They're the guys who've put this event together. So yeah, the historic issue where the short stories started appearing. So like I say, the adverts unfortunately don't survive into these bound sets usually, but the senses-shattering pin-up page is a fantastic engraving, I guess, of a tableau of the Snow Queen. So a really nice picture. Sometimes these would be illustrations of a story or something, and sometimes they're just freestanding nice pictures. So here we go. So the first article is about these tableaux vivants, which is where, as I understand it, people would dress up, pose to replicate a famous artwork, or it was 19th century cosplay really. So there's a piece about those, plenty of pictures. So this was the Strand's USP, as it were, to have an illustration on nearly every page, and certainly every time you turn a page, every opening would have illustrations. They might be photographs, engravings, whatever. So here we go. Woke Up at Last is a short story. Anecdotes Off the Warpath. More fiction, I believe. No, Anecdotes of the Warpath. Moving on to Why He Failed. So you're getting stacks of fiction, either to read at the time or save up until you've got your volume in book form. A Regiment on Wheels. Not the monstrous regiment of women, famous for their cycling, but this is about military cyclists. And again, we've got photos, drawings, etc.
My granddad was a military cyclist.
Dr. Jennie's granddad was a military cyclist in World War One, so yeah, it's a thing. Maybe it's still now. And still no Sherlock Holmes. Portraits of celebrities at different times of their lives, which sounds like something you'd find on like Facebook or something now, really. So you'd basically they'd get various pictures of some notable, such as Miss Mary Moore. You'd see what she looked like at various times. Sister Gabrielle, a reminiscence. Illustrated interviews. Interview with somebody with pictures of like their house, things like that. Then we get something called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. A Scandal in Belgravia. It's not the title of the story, it's A Scandal in Bohemia. The first Sherlock Holmes story. Here's where it is. Actual paper that somebody bought in 1891 and probably read. And as a story, I think it's got a fantastic, perhaps one of the best opening lines in a short story. Certainly the best use of italics. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. And like I said, illustrations all the way. So because it's in here, it had illustrations. In fact, by Sidney Paget, who is giving Holmes his physique, look and body language, I guess, to some extent, complementing the text with his visual depiction. And it's so frequently illustrated you could almost think of it as a sort of graphic novel. I've actually got an interesting book about the Strand Magazine. This is by a guy called Reginald Pound, who was one of the later editors, and he was around to sort of know people who had been there in the very early days, and it's really interesting as magazine history. And there's a chapter called Enter Sherlock Holmes, which talks about the massive impact that these Holmes stories that started then would have. So one thing to say is it's Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, so it's not a novel, it's short stories, but it's also a series connected, and this was an innovation, and that really caught on. Beloved by editors and publishers of magazines, because unlike serial novels, you were less likely to think, oh, well, it's already up to chapter 5, I won't bother buying the magazine. And also you're more likely to be hooked in to think, got to get more of these because that was really great. So that became a thing, and short stories became so popular it was almost like a monster. You know, there could well be novels that weren't written because of short stories and short story series replacing the serialised novels that used to be more popular. Arthur Conan Doyle paid 30 guineas each for the first set of Holmes stories, 50 guineas each for the second series. Seems reasonable, as these were a massive commercial success. What about the story itself? Just talking about it in a spoiler-free way, even though it's a well-known story that's been adapted for screen, that kind of thing. I can see why it really grabbed people, because you get the characters, you get Holmes and Watson in Baker Street, so you get that sort of imaginative base for them, and you get the kind of motifs that happen in story after story and adaptation after adaptation, such as Holmes amazing Watson with some feat of deduction about where he's been and what he's been doing and things like that. You also get a story where it seems like everybody at some point is wearing a disguise, which is interesting, and that's something that Paget picked up on. So you see these disguised characters. You get a female adversary, so the woman, Irene Adler, is features in this, and I actually listened to the story on the Audrey app, where there's some commentary by Daisy Cowley, who sort of points out just how surprising it would be to have a female character who's so strong, has such a lot of agency, she can go where she wants, she sort of does her own thing. Mild spoiler is that she is one of the disguisers. She's disguised as a man at some point. A man. And full spoiler mode, she wins. Irene Adler defeats or outwits Sherlock Holmes himself in his first short story, which is an interesting way to go. So that sort of makes it really strong as well, I think. But I would also say I forgive pastiches a lot, but they do tend to overuse Irene Adler. If they do anything else other than adapt this story and have her defeating Holmes and disappearing over the horizon, if they make her a recurring character, a full-on love interest, a detective, all of that sort of stuff, it usually kills off, to me, interest in series like Elementary or Sherlock or whatever. She's the less you have of her, she comes, lights up the room, does her stuff, disappears, and that works really well. So that's why I think it's a really strong story. Yeah, so Sherlock Holmes carried on appearing in these Strand magazines famously with the Paget illustrations. It's almost sort of co-creation. You could say that Arthur Conan Doyle obviously creates the character, but Sidney Paget as the first of the illustrators is doing an important job, and even the format of the magazine itself and various people involved in that was sort of part of the fun, I suppose. So that's the end of the Canon week. I think the holder of the sixpence buying this magazine and thinking, oh, that was quite a good story, but I also like the other one about the warpath, might have been amazed that more than 100 years later the Royal Mint would create a coin worth I think 20 times as much as the sixpence with that character on it. His head against a background of a list of story titles: Hound of the Baskerville, Sign of the Four, Study in Scarlet, Speckled Band, A Scandal in Bohemia. Yes, the story is here on a 10-bob bit. What more can you ask for your sort of place in the pantheon of literature. Okay, bye then. Back soon with something else.